In this video, we're asking ourselves is what I'm holding in the hand is actually the best geisha coffee in the world. Welcome, my name is Patrick Rolfe and this is Coffee with April. For this video, we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to talk about our limited box concept here at April, and more specifically, we're going to deep dive into this month's box. So the reason why we're doing a box like this in the first place is that we're asking ourselves, what is the best coffee in the world? And when you ask yourself that question, there's multiple layers to that answer. Perhaps the most important part of that is to figure out, okay, but where does the raw material come from? What is the green coffee we work with? So it's important to understand that regardless of innovation in brewing, innovation in roasting, different recipes, geeking out, the best coffees are possible because the green coffee we're using are fantastic. That's really what it comes down to. So what we do here at April is that we every month pick what we believe to be the best of the best of the best. The kind of coffee that it comes in really small lots, the kind of coffee that you're not able to taste on a daily basis. One, because they're really expensive. Two, because they're very limited. And also three, sometimes very hard to get your hands on. And for this box, we are super excited to bring to you one of our favorite farms, arguably one of the best geisha farms in the world, just Finca Deborah in Panama. So Jamison and his team has done an amazing job over the years cultivating, exploring, innovating geisha as a varietal. So processing wise, it's getting better. Green coffee wise, in terms of quality, it's getting better. Every single season we work with his coffees, we find them to be some of the very best of what we're tasting. And it's interesting to see how consistent the farm is just in general over the years, because we've seen a lot of geisha farms that some seasons do a very good job and other seasons the coffee just doesn't come out quite as well. And Jamison was actually kind enough to share some details about the 3 specific lots that we have chosen for this box. So we're going to switch over to Jamison at the farm in Panama, and he's going to give you some updates, and then we'll come back here to the April store in Copenhagen.
Patrick and the team at April Coffee have selected 3 different coffees from Finca Deborah. The first being Terroir. And Terroir in 2016 gained acclaim when this coffee won the World Barista Championship in Dublin and scored perfect 6s in espresso course. Terroir has gone on to win numerous national championships and has become a favorite in many cafes and enjoyed on the espresso bar for its clean, aromatic, and purely geisha-esque characteristics. In fact, some refer to it as the Queen of Geisha. We named this coffee Terroir because of what you see behind me and below me. And that is the terroir of this farm, this place, is spectacular and is the consummate growing ground, so to speak, for this particular variety. The processing for terroir is what we consider a traditional process. It's a traditionally washed process whereby we remove the fruit and the skin from the cherry. And that coffee is then placed on raised African beds in a 3-tiered bed system that I designed about 10 years ago. The coffee is actually dried in the shade to avoid any cracking in the parchment and to also prevent the drying process from damaging the coffee. So in this slow-dried approach, the parchment does not crack, and the coffee has the opportunity to dry evenly throughout the grain. The second process that April and Patrick's team have selected is illumination. Illumination has all of the hallmarks of terroir, only with the carbonic macerated process, what we have is an elevated acidity and a clarity in the cup that is quite amplified due to the processing technique. And the carbonic macerated process is fairly simple, but it does require discipline and constant monitoring. What the carbonic macerated process allows me to do is slow the fermentation process down and dial in those notes, those characteristics so special in the coffee. And so in a sense, we have almost the difference between analog and digital with music, to borrow a phrase from a friend. And you have an extremely clear cup, very bright and very transparent. The third process, selected by Patrick and his team at April Coffee, is Afterglow. And Afterglow is our traditional natural geisha here at Finca Deborah. It is a beautiful expression of a natural geisha, and the cup shines both in flavor profile, in acidity, and clarity. This coffee is very, very clean, and it really expresses not just the inherent fruit qualities here at Finca Deborah, but also its terroir and variety. So we've captured all of the things that we wanted to capture in Afterglow, in expressing the geisha variety, its terroir here at Finca Deborah, and processing prowess. Our processing starts with perfectly ripe cherries, hand-selected, and selected for a second time as they are placed on the raised African bed system. From there, the coffee is slow-dried for approximately 20 to 22 days. And this depends on the climate because we dry all of our coffees in parabolic dry houses. After spending the requisite amount of time on that top level of the bed, we bring it down to the second level where Afterglow is essentially dried in the shade. And we slow that drying process down so that the coffee can absorb much of those fruit flavors that are so characteristic of Afterglow and so desired. Aside from our extremely special terroir, the techniques with which we both harvest and process our coffees are quite unique. We are very meticulous with our processing standards, and this is one of the primary reasons that Finca Deborah coffees, year after year, consistently shine both on the table and in competition. Many thanks to Patrick and the team at April Coffee. We're delighted to be a part of your offer list for 2021, and we'll look forward to seeing the coffees online and in your shops. Thank you again.
So green coffee, arguably the most important part. Now, does that mean that the other parts are not important? Obviously not. So the second part we're looking into here is roasting, right? And it's interesting because it's basically roasting the same varietal processed in 3 different ways. We're talking about a natural, a washed, and a carbonic macerated coffee. And there's always been a lot of discussions about how does processing affect the roasting in itself. Now, a few pointers of what we did. First of all, the process starts with sample roasting. We go through different ideas and different approaches, working with a small Ikawa format. Then after that, we kind of go on profiling on the loring that we're roasting on, right? So for those of you that don't know, it's basically a 15 kilo falcon. And what we've done here is something that we don't always do. We've gone down to 7.5 kilo batch size. One, because it's very small lots and we don't have that much of the green coffee. 2, to give us just a bit more control over the momentum from our normal kind of 15 kilo batches that we do. Now, another part that we're doing here, and this is the same with the all 3 lots, is that we're actually starting them with a lower energy and then ramping up energy across the roast, basically. A concept that a lot of people discuss as soaking. We don't really use that in the traditional term of the process, but what we're trying to do is to really just make sure that it's a small batch size and we don't want this to roast too fast. We want to stretch out the roast times, make them a bit longer, because in our experience, when it comes to these kind of coffees, they really need time. Time makes them better when it comes to roasting, both in terms of the actual roasting process, but also in terms of resting afterwards, but we come to that later. So the real difference between this coffee is really what happens around crack and how they behave in that process. Now, I should say that because we normally do a 15 kilo batch, when we transition over to the 7.5 kilo batch, we have to go down basically a cool down process with the machine to make sure that the initial starting energy of each batch is very similar. Now, when we're approaching crack in this roast, what's interesting here is that all three coffees are behaving slightly different. That being said, we're still trying to push a relatively similar approach when it comes to time after crack, when it comes to end temperature. And again with these coffees, it's about actually stretching them out a bit more. So we're roasting with longer times, we're roasting with slightly higher end temperatures than what we're used to roasting other coffees. Now, for some people that means, oh, this is gonna be darker. But the reality is it's actually not darker. It's just that these coffees require a slightly different heat application to get really well roasted, right? So light roasted coffee, but also the varietals coming out of, or the geisha coming out of Finca Deborah, can also take a little bit of energy. You can caramelize that sugar a bit more because the quality of the flavors are so high that it actually never goes down. It seems like the sugar content in the coffee is just basically behaving a lot more mature and a lot more predictable than in a lot of other coffees. And this is true from season to season to season. Now, after roasting this coffee, resting is incredibly important, right? We always recommend at least 2 weeks of resting. Most of our coffees on bar is served when they're 3 to 4, sometimes even 5 weeks old. And we find again and again that that's when it's tasting the best. A little tip for you homebrewer is to actually brew the coffee the day before. That's something that we continuously recommend. Helps a bit with the degassing. You just grind down a dose, put it in an airtight container, and then store it for the next day, and then you brew it, and it will taste better than something that is grounded fresh and brewed the same day. When it comes to brewing the coffee itself, we're always recommending the April brewer. In the end, we created it to brew our kind of roast style. If you don't have one, go flat bottom over a cone shape, always. Secondly, we have a lot of different recipes and videos when it comes to using the April brewer. So I'm going to refer to one of our standard recipes. We're going to show it here in the video, but then you can also look at those other videos individually. Now, we're actually brewing these three coffees relatively similar, the difference being the washed coffee. So the natural and the carbonic, we both recommend a 13-gram dose, 200 grams of water. We're doing it in a two-step pour. First pour 100 grams, 40 grams in a circle, 60 grams in a center. And we let that rest. Then at 35 seconds, we repeat that pour. And we want a grind size that gives us a total brew time of about 210 to 220. Now, when it comes to the washed one, we actually recommend doing the same pouring style, but we're just taking down the amount of coffee to 12 instead of 13. It's just increasing the ratio. We're pulling a lot more complexity out of it. And the structure of the coffee is just so elegant and refined that it can really deal with it. So that's what we recommend in terms of the brewing part as well, right? Now, basically, what we want to hear from you guys now, we want to hear, how did this coffee taste for you? What is your recommendation? What is your favorite coffees? We think the idea of exploring the best green coffees you can find being really interesting, and we love to kind of hear your thoughts and ideas on it. Now, on top of that, as always, if you want specific roasting notes, ask specific roasting questions, brewing questions, Patreon is where you do it. Make sure you sign up, and we give you a lot more in-depth experience when it comes to these coffees. With that, we want to thank you for watching. We hope you enjoy the box for this month, and we're looking forward to bringing you some really cool coffees in the future as well. Thank you for watching. We want to give a special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. It's because of you that we are able to continue to make these videos. And we want you all to feel free to always come with suggestions and ideas on the content that you want to see, because we are doing this for you and because of you. Thank you from all of us here at April.